vegetables they cannot grow on their crowded islets. 30 miles from Langa Langa brought us up to the passage between Basakana Island and the mainland. Here, at nightfall, the wind left us, and all night, with the whale boat towing ahead and the crew on board sweating at the steeps, we strove to win through. But the tide was against us. At midnight, midway in the passage, we came up with the Eugene, a big recruiting schooner, towing with 2 whaleboats. Her skipper, Captain Keller, a sturdy young German of 22, came on board for a gam, and the latest news of Malaita was swapped back and forth. He had been in luck, having gathered in 20 recruits at the village of Fiu. While lying there, one of the customary courageous killings had taken place. The murdered boy was what is called a saltwater bushman. That is, a saltwater man who is half bushman and who lives by the sea but does not live on an islet. 3 bushmen came down to this man where he was working in his garden. They behaved in friendly fashion, and after a time suggested kai kai. Kai kai means food. He built a fire and started to boil some taro. While bending over the pot, one of the bushmen shot him through the head. He fell into the flames, whereupon they thrust a spear through his stomach, turned it around, and broke it off. "My word," said Captain Keller, "I don't ever want to be shot with a Snider. Spread. You could drive a horse and carriage through that hole in his head." Another recent courageous killing I heard of on Malaita was that of an old man. A bush chief had died a natural death. Now the bushmen don't believe in natural deaths. No one was ever known to die a natural death. The only way to die is by bullet, tomahawk, or spear thrust. When a man dies any other way, it is a clear case of having been charmed to death. When the bush chief died naturally, his tribe placed the guilt on a certain family. Since it did not matter which one of the family was killed, they selected this old man who lived by himself. This would make it easy. Furthermore, he possessed no Snider. Also, he was blind. The old fellow got an inkling of what was coming and laid in a large supply of arrows. 3 brave warriors, each with a Snider, came down upon him in the night time. All night they fought valiantly with him. Whenever they moved in the bush and made a noise or a rustle, he discharged an arrow in that direction. In the morning, when his last arrow was gone, the 3 heroes crept up on him and blew his brains out. Morning found us still valiantly toiling through the passage. At last, in despair, we turned tail, ran out to sea, and sailed clear round Basakana to our objective, Malu. The anchorage at Malu was very good, but it lay between the shore and an ugly reef, and while easy to enter, it was difficult to leave. The direction of the southeast trade necessitated a beat to windward. The point of the reef was widespread and shallow, while a current bore down at all times upon the point. Mr. Caulfield, the missionary at Malu, arrived in his whaleboat from a trip down the coast. A slender, delicate man he was, enthusiastic in his work, level-headed and practical, a true 20th century soldier of the Lord. When he came down to this station on Malaita, as he said, he agreed to come for 6 months. He further agreed that if he were alive at the end of that time, he would continue on. 6 years had passed and he was still continuing on. Nevertheless, he was justified in his doubt as to living longer than 6 months. 3 missionaries had preceded him on Malaita, and in less than that time 2 had died of fever and the 3rd had gone home a wreck. "What murder are you talking about?" he asked suddenly, in the midst of a confused conversation with Captain Jansen. Captain Jansen explained. "Oh, that's not the one I have reference to," quoth Mr. Caulfield. "That's old already. It happened 2 weeks ago. It was here at Malu that I atoned for all the exulting and gloating I had been guilty of over the Solomon sore Charmian had collected at Langa Langa. Mr. Caulfield was indirectly responsible for my atonement. He presented us with a chicken, which I pursued into the bush with a rifle. My intention was to clip off its head. I succeeded, but in doing so fell over a log and barked my shin. Result, 3 Solomon sores. This made 5 altogether that were adorning my person. Also, Captain Jansen and Nakata had caught gari gari. Literally translated, gari gari is scratch scratch, but translation was not necessary for the rest of us. The skipper's and Nakata's gymnastics served as a translation without words. No, the Solomon Islands are not as healthy as they might be. I am writing this article on the island of Isabel, where we have taken the Snark to careen and clean her cooper. I got over my last attack of fever this morning, and have had only one free day between attacks. Charmian's are 2 weeks apart. Wada is a wreck from fever. Last night he showed all the symptoms of coming down with pneumonia. Henry, a strapping giant of a Tahitian, just up from his last dose of fever, is dragging around the deck like a last year's crabapple. Both he and Tehei have accumulated a praiseworthy display of Solomon sores. Also they have caught a new form of gari-gari, a sort of vegetable poisoning like poison oak or poison ivy. But they are not unique in this. A number of days ago, Charmian, Martin, and I went pigeon shooting on a small island, and we have had a foretaste of eternal torment ever since. Also, on that small island, Martin cut the soles of his feet to ribbons on the coral whilst chasing a shark. At least, so he says, but from the glimpse I caught of him I thought it was the other way about. The coral cuts have all become Solomon sores. Before my last fever I knocked the skin off my knuckles while heaving on a line, and I now have 3 fresh sores. And poor Nakata! For 3 weeks he has been unable to sit down. He sat down yesterday for the first time, and managed to stay down for 15 minutes. He says cheerfully that he expects to be cured of his gari-gari in another month. Furthermore, his gari-gari, from too enthusiastic scratching, has furnished footholds for countless Solomon sores. Still furthermore, he has just come down with his 7th attack of fever. If I were king, the worst punishment I could inflict on my enemies would be to banish them to the Solomons. On second thought, king or no king, I don't think I'd have the heart to do it. Recruiting plantation laborers on a small, narrow yacht, built for harbor sailing, is not any too nice. The decks swarm with recruits and their families. The main cabin is packed with them. At night they sleep there. The only entrance to our tiny cabin is through the main cabin, and we jam our way through them or walk over them. Nor is this nice. One and all, they are afflicted with every form of malignant skin disease. Some have ringworm, others have bukua. This latter is caused by a vegetable parasite that invades the skin and eats it away. The itching is intolerable. The afflicted ones scratch until the air is filled with fine, dry flakes. Then there are yaws and many other skin ulcerations. Men come aboard with Solomon sores in their feet so large they can walk only on their toes, or with holes in their legs so terrible that a fist could be thrust into the bone. Blood poisoning is very frequent, and Captain Jansen, with sheath knife and sail needle, operates lavishly on one and all. No matter how desperate the situation, after opening and cleansing, he claps on a poultice of sea biscuit soaked in water. Whenever we see a particularly horrible case, we retire to a corner and deluge our own sores with corrosive sublimate. And so we live and eat and sleep on the Minota, taking our chances and pretending it is good. At Suava, another artificial island, I had a second crow over Charmian. A big fella, Marster belong Suava, which means the high chief of Suava, came on board. But first he sent an emissary to Captain Jansen for a fathom of calico with which to cover his royal nakedness. Meanwhile he lingered in the canoe alongside. The regal dirt on his chest, I swear, was half an inch thick, while it was a good wager that the underneath layers were anywhere from 10 to 20 years of age. He sent his emissary on board again, who explained that the big fellow Marster belong Sava was condescendingly willing enough to shake hands with Captain Jensen and me and cadge a stick or two of trade tobacco, but that nevertheless his high-born soul was still at so lofty an altitude that it could not sink itself to such a depth of degradation as to shake hands with a mere female woman. Poor Charmian! Since her Malaita experiences she has become a changed woman. Her meekness and humbleness are appallingly becoming, and I should not be surprised, when we return to civilization and stroll along a sidewalk, to see her take her station, with bowed head, a yard in the rear. Nothing much happened at Suava. Bichu, the native cook, deserted. The Minota dragged anchor. It blew heavy squalls of wind and rain. The mate, Mr. Jacobson, and Wada were prostrated with fever. Our Solomon sores increased and multiplied. And the cockroaches on board held a combined 4th of July and coronation parade. They selected midnight for the time, and our tiny cabin for the place. They were from 2 to 3 inches long. There were hundreds of them, and they walked all over us. When we attempted to pursue them, they left solid footing, rose up in the air, and fluttered about like hummingbirds. They were much larger than ours on the Snark. but ours are young yet, and haven't had a